Good evening and welcome. It's so nice to see everyone here. My name is Kari. I'm a member of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Dayton, Pennsylvania. We in the Christian tradition are currently in the middle of what's called the season of creation, which began with the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation on September 1st and ends with the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi on October 4th. Among other things, it's a time for us to renew our commitment to be stewards of creation. While this is not a faith-based event, it is out of this context that I'm honored to have been invited to be the moderator of this informative event on air monitoring and emergency systems in Beaver County. I will briefly introduce each speaker as we go through the event, and then following all of the presentations, we will take questions for our panelists in a discussion format. As we go through the presentations, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end. Before we start, however, I'd like to introduce Ryan Clover from Halt the Harm, who's going to do a brief technological overview. Ryan.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm so glad to be here. My name is Ryan. I'm with Halt the Harm Network, and I'll be doing some tech support throughout the evening. You can chat me directly in the chat as well. I just want to let everyone know that you can switch between speaker and gallery view up in the top right. And if you click on gallery, you can see all the other lovely people that are here, which is always fun to see. We have a great audience tonight, great lineup. And let's see, this will be recorded. It's also streaming live right now. So tell everybody that you know who's interested to check out the event on the Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community Facebook page as well. And again, I'll be in the chat if you have any technical problems, and I'll also put in my email there in case you get booted from the event and have trouble getting back in. All right. Thank you so much.
And I believe Bob Schmetzer is going to do our welcome. There he is.
All right. So I'm just quickly resharing my screen here. And here we go.
Welcome, everyone, to the Health and Safety Virtual Event Series in Beaver County. On this Wednesday, September 16th at 7 p.m., we will cover air monitoring and emergency systems. My name is Bob Schmetzer, and I would like to open with an overview. I was born and raised in the Ohio River Valley, and I worked most of my life here. My family has been here for many generations, and some were daughters of the American Revolution. Making this area a more livable place to live is very personal to me. So let's get started with some of the main points. We're preparing for the shell cracker plant and other industrial expansion in the region. We also are looking at how to prepare residents of Beaver County and the broader Ohio River Valley on what they need to know to stay safe. Understanding air and water quality monitoring and making that information available to everyone in the public. Building a better understanding of our emergency systems and what we need to do and steps we need to take just in case there's an emergency. Doing all of this without attacking industry, but rather keeping our communities safe is a common and sympathetic interest on everyone's part. I want to thank all those who have participated in making this an informative event series. At this time, I will turn this over to our moderator, Sister Kari. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Our first three presenters in our program this evening are going to talk about their personal experiences during the Revolution pipeline explosion and the chlorine fire that affected so many in our community. Joining us now are Gdula and Barbara Goblick.
Hello, my name is Barbara Goblick, and this is my neighbor, Gdula. We live on Ivy Lane, Center Township, Beaver County, and we're here today to tell you our story and the excellent interaction we had with the first responders.
As a child, I had a reoccurring nightmare that the woods behind my house were on fire. On September the 10th, 2018, the earth shook and woke me from my sleep. There was a roar and a hiss, and that woke my husband. We ran to the window, and my childhood nightmare, unfortunately, was a reality. The forest was on fire. The flames were as high as the ancient pine trees. We knew immediately that the 24-inch Revolution pipeline owned by Energy Transfer had exploded. I dialed 911 several times, and the line was always busy. The sky outside was so bright it looked like daylight, even though it was nighttime. Then, all of a sudden, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Barbara. She was calling to make sure we were safe. I told her I could not reach 911, and thankfully, she had gotten through. As we ended our conversation, I advised her, prepare to evacuate.
At approximately 4:54 a.m., I was standing in my kitchen making a cup of coffee, preparing to leave for work, and my kitchen door shook violently. Before I could turn to look out the door, there was an explosion, and the whole house shook. My mom, asleep in her room, called from her bedroom. We could see an orange glow through the curtain. I looked out the window and knew instantly the pipeline had caused the explosion. As I ran to turn off the alarm and go outside, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. When I got outside, I was amazed at how loud the sound of the fire was. The roar was amazing. I finally got through to 911. I told him the pipeline had exploded. He asked me how I knew because everyone was telling him a plane had gone down. I said I was looking at the fire and it was on the pipeline. He asked, "What is all that noise?" When I said it was the roar of the fire, instantly the tone of the call changed, and he said the first responders were on their way. The first police car was on Ivy Lane before I was off the phone. The policeman had heard the explosion and followed the flames in the sky. Within a few minutes of my call, the road was lined with emergency vehicles from end to end. There were firemen and policemen everywhere. Shortly after they arrived, a fireman came to our door telling us to evacuate. We grabbed a few essentials, our cat, Mom's medicine, my coffee, and were out the door. On the way to the car, several firemen saw my mom with her walker and rushed to her aid. She was able to make it to the car unaided. However, as I had my hands full with our stuff and the cat, she said she felt much safer with the firemen there. She knew if she stumbled, they would have prevented her from falling.
The day of the explosion, no one knew the pipeline was operational. Not the police, not the firefighters, not the township supervisors, not emergency services. The pipeline is still disconnected. We know that someday it will be operational. Barbara and I are working with our township supervisors, our chief of police, and the pipeline for notification prior to the flow of gas so that in the future we will be prepared in case we need to evacuate again.
We are very proud of our first responders' actions that day, despite the fact that emergency management was not notified that the pipeline was being put in service. They took the appropriate action, erred on the side of caution, and kept us safe.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Marcia Lehman.
Hi, my name is Marcia Lehman, and I'm a founding member of BC MAC since 2010. This is my personal story about what I experienced last summer in the early morning hours of Saturday, July the 13th, 2019. Little did I know that a serious chemical reaction and the resulting fire and dangerous release of chemicals had occurred the night before, around 9 p.m., at an old, dilapidated, abandoned building in Rochester called the Pool Doctor. At that site, that few people even knew existed, were many hazardous chemicals that had been stored for many years, unattended in all sorts of eroding containers. I live 7 miles south of Rochester in Harmony Township, and I'm about 1 mile from the Ohio River. So I am directly affected by what happens in the low-lying Ohio River Valley, what we call the river shaft of potentially polluting air currents. On Friday evening before I went to bed, a cold front had come in. It was cooler, but the air was very humid and still. But I was glad to open up the windows and turn on the fan for some fresh air. Around 5:45 a.m. Saturday morning, I roused semi-asleep to an awful Clorox-like smell, thinking in my sleepy stupor, gee, that's odd. I don't remember adding this much Clorox to my laundry when I washed my linens. I immediately got out of bed in the early morning, first light, and realized my entire bedroom and house smelled of strong chlorine. When I looked out the window, the entire valley, as far as the eye could see, was enveloped with a thick, white fog-like cloud. Of course, I immediately closed all the windows. I felt a burning nasal irritation and a headache coming on, pretty unsettling. Right away, I called the Beaver Falls DEP office and got a message, and then I got on the DEP website and sent an email at about 6 a.m. and got an auto reply. Later in the day, I heard on the news what had happened. A thick chlorine bromine fire and resulting cloud had formed and drifted over our region. The emergency responders issued a 5-mile shelter in place from midnight to mid-afternoon on Saturday. Some residents received an emergency auto alert call from Swift 911 on their phones, but many did not. There were numerous reports of hundreds of 911 calls to Beaver County 911 Dispatch Center that night and into Saturday. Later, we heard that the Beaver Valley Medical Center emergency department was filled with patients suffering effects of breathing the chlorine bromine chemicals. Eventually, 2 representatives responded to me on July the 17th with an explanation of what had happened, including who would be holding the bag for the costs, the taxpayers, of course, which the cost now exceeds 10 times greater what was originally estimated, now over $3 million. Here are 5 lessons I've learned from this situation. Pollution follows the low-lying pathways of the Ohio River Valley, called a valley for a reason. The pollution pathways are the same areas that will be affected by shell pollution. The Swift 911 emergency response system needs to notify every household in Beaver County. The situation in Rochester needs to be seen as a wake-up call for much more devastating situations that will inevitably happen with the Shell petrochemical ethane plant. This event acted as a warning. We shouldn't need another to protect our communities and put in place an effective early warning system before Shell becomes operational. The effects of hazardous chemicals are immediate, dangerous, and life-threatening. When the first problems occur at the Shell plant, we might be experiencing a dangerous situation today, not just the threat of cancer in 15 to 20 years. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marcia. Next, I would like to introduce Anna Hoffman from the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University, who will talk about the air monitoring systems in our region. Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman. I work with people impacted by industrial air pollution for Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon. Together we collect air quality data, mostly from citizen science networks that these folks are a part of, and use programs to visualize that data in different ways to support our stories that describe our local experience here in the Pittsburgh area. Collecting air quality data in our region has some challenges specific to our topography and weather patterns. To meet those challenges, we need robust networks of air quality monitors, not just one or two strategically placed. When air becomes trapped in our valleys in inversions, particularly along the industrial corridors of our river valleys, often the pollution takes the shape of the valley and circulates the pollution, significantly affecting people that live in the direct area. And then on other days, wind is able to carry air pollution in other less predictable patterns, definitely still affected by the hills and valleys. So this is why ideally air quality monitors create circles around pollution sources at varying altitudes up and down the hills, and that makes it so that this monitoring network can catch pollution events in all conditions. The Shell cracker plant, as many of you know, is being built in the Ohio River Valley here. If we take a look at the active air quality monitors available on the EPA's publicly accessible interactive map site, which I'll pull up by clicking the check boxes on these pollutant layers that have active status next to their title, we can assess how prepared this government agency is to catch pollution events and harmful emissions when the plant becomes operational. It looks like they have one location measuring ozone and sulfur dioxide to the north, and 3 locations with 4 total airborne lead monitors to the southwest and along the river valley to the east of the Shell site. Based on this publicly accessible location data, I think a conclusion can be drawn that there are many gaps in this EPA monitor network. They do not create a full circle around the new pollution source. Besides their location, are these the right type of monitors to collect pollution data from this new pollution source? The cracker plant's process of heating ethane and turning it into ethylene through that cracking process will produce many various emissions of concern. But the most significant ones will be volatile organic compounds, VOCs. These are carcinogenic compounds like benzene, toluene, formaldehyde, and many others. From this EPA map of active monitors, none of those would be measured. EPA grade monitors are important for ensuring that pollution mitigation enforcement orders are issued by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and followed by Shell. In conclusion, I think this EPA.gov interactive air quality monitor map stands as evidence to advocate for expanded VOC monitoring networks ready to measure pollution levels when the Shell plant turns on. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me about Create Lab's air quality monitoring and mapping programs. And here is a link to the EPA's interactive air quality monitor map. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was very informative. As we prepare for the Shell petrochemical facility to come online, we now hear from Adam Kron and Ben Kunstman of the Environmental Integrity Project and Karl Koerner from the Clean Air Council.
Hi, I'm Adam Kron, an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project. With me is our staff engineer, Ben Kunstman. We'll be discussing the legal background of the settlement that EIP and Clean Air Council reached with Shell to require Fenceline monitoring at the petrochemicals complex. This settlement came out of an appeal that we filed in 2015, challenging an air permit that DEP issued to Shell for construction of the complex. Our main claim in the appeal was that Shell did not choose the most stringent emission controls for its flares and for its fugitive emissions, including leaks. Now, because the petrochemicals complex is a major source of volatile organic compounds, like benzene and toluene, and because Beaver County is a non-attainment area for ozone, Shell was required to seek out the most stringent controls from other facilities and regulations, and then either to choose those controls or prove that it couldn't implement them at the facility. In particular, we pointed to other petrochemical facilities with Fenceline monitoring, like Shell's Deer Park facility, and to EPA's refinery rule, which requires Fenceline monitoring for controlling fugitive emissions. Given that we've incorporated elements of the refinery rule in our settlement, Ben will give some background on how those requirements work.
Thanks, Adam. The refinery rule was finalized in 2015 with final amendments made in 2020. For the Fenceline monitoring, it was a work practice standard that was required to improve management of fugitive emissions. This uses isolated benzene concentration from the refineries and assesses them as an annual average. Upon exceedance of an action level, the refinery must conduct a root cause analysis, identifying the reason for exceedances, and corrective action addressing any source of emissions. EPA recently finalized a rule for the ethylene production sector, which Shell Petrochemical is a part of, but notably this rule doesn't require Fenceline monitoring, unlike our settlement and the refinery rule. For the Shell settlement, we based the requirements on advancements made by the refinery sector rule. For example, we required flaring requirements such as net heating value of the combustion zone, which incorporates assist air and steam into the calculation. And for Fenceline monitoring, we based it off of the refinery rule plus additional requirements. So we included passive monitoring, which are the sorbent tubes required by the refinery rule, as well as continuous monitoring for VOC emission spikes. Next, I'll send it over to Karl at Clean Air Council for some additional detail on the Fenceline monitoring.
Hi, my name is Karl Koerner. I'm the engineer for Clean Air Council. I helped draft the settlement negotiations that will form the basis for the Fenceline monitoring system at the Shell facility. I'll be giving you a brief overview of how the system is designed, including locations of the monitors, chemicals they will measure, action levels and what they mean, and an overview of the monitoring website. The Fenceline monitoring system is actually two systems, a continuous air monitoring system, or CAMS, seen in the image next to me in green, and a passive air monitoring system, or PAMS, seen in light blue. Each system should be capable of detecting benzene, 1,3-butadiene, N-hexane, naphthalene, and toluene. These chemicals were chosen as they are the highest concentration hazardous air pollutants with the most associated risk according to Shell's inhalation risk assessment. The PAMS is a series of passive sorbent tubes that are directly modeled after the refinery rule. Samples from the system are collected every 2 weeks. If after 2 weeks, the lowest and highest concentration tubes at the PAMS system exceeds 2.77 parts per billion of benzene, they will trigger investigations and repair actions at the facility. This means that 2.77 parts per billion is the action level for the PAMS. The CAMS is a combination of 4 total VOC monitors, 1 upwind and 3 downwind, coupled with 3 Summa canisters that will allow for continuous monitoring of total VOCs and speciation of chemicals when the total VOC concentration goes above a certain threshold meant to represent normal facility operation, which is also the action level. When the total VOC monitor goes above an action level concentration, a solenoid will activate the Summa canister, starting a collection of a sample. The action level thresholds will start at 56 parts per billion TVOC, 63 parts per billion TVOC, and 48 parts per billion TVOC at each respective CAMS, and can be adjusted upward and downward by 10% to prevent excessive false positives or non-detects. This adjustment upward only happens if a field investigation does not yield a source of excessive emissions. A downward adjustment happens if no investigations take place within certain timeframes. The monitoring data website will be an important tool to watch emissions at the facility and interact with the data produced by each monitoring system. The website will be easy to access on Shell's PA Chemical Complex website. The website will include basic information about the system and all CAMS and PAMS action levels, as well as changes to action levels and the reason for these changes. Data will be available 30 days after the start of the program. Data will be in tabular format, and some important data displayed on the website includes all PAMS sorbent tube concentration data from all locations, all PAMS action level exceedances, total NM/NE/VOC concentration for each PID, wind speed and wind direction data, Summa canister concentration data for each chemical of concern, field investigation statements and the root cause of excess emissions, and Shell's actions taken as a result of the field investigations. I hope this helps you understand the Fenceline system a little bit better, and if you have questions, I'll happily answer them. Thank you.
Thank you all for that informative presentation. Next, I'd like to introduce Mark Dixon, who will talk with us on how individual citizens can play a role in monitoring our air. Mark.
Hi, my name is Mark Dixon, and I'm a filmmaker and air quality advocate who lives in Pittsburgh. There are many different tools available for citizens to understand and possibly even protect themselves from the air pollution around them. And these tools are particularly useful when large industrial pollution sources exist near large population centers. There are websites and high and low cost air monitors and camera systems and a range of other community tools that you can use to help protect yourself and your community. And I'm going to review some of these tools for you today. The first I want to mention are EPA reference monitors. These generally measure particles like PM 2.5, PM 10, but they also can measure ozone, SO2, NO2. They're very accurate. They'll hold up in court, but they're very expensive, and sometimes they go down for maintenance. There's not very many of them in any given region. They also don't measure VOCs. A low-cost monitor alternative to these EPA reference monitors are called purple air monitors. They measure PM 2.5 and PM 10 and particle counts. They're very inexpensive relative to these EPA reference monitors. They're easy to place all over. They give you actually pretty much real-time updates, and they have open data, so anybody in the world can use the data anywhere in the world. But they're not as accurate as reference monitors, and they also don't currently measure VOCs, though that may change. It's also worth noting that the EPA has recently updated its mapping information to combine both reference monitors and low-cost purple air monitors all in a single map. It's really useful for pollution events, but also for the fires out west. Aware monitors are another type of low-cost monitor that measures dust like PM 2.5, and also they measure VOCs, but the data is closed. AirVis monitors also measure VOCs, and they're relatively low cost, and their data actually is public, and you can review the information from these monitors on a map. There's also more expensive options that citizens can use called Summa canisters. Basically, they're in a category of air sampling canisters that are very accurate, that citizens can deploy if they want to, but they're pretty expensive to use though. Each time you get a sample in one of these canisters, you have to send it in and pay money to a laboratory for them to send you back a list of all the chemicals that they found in that air sample. Another tool that citizens can use that's a little different from a particle monitoring system is called the Breathe Cam, which actually uses cameras to monitor an industrial site. And it can basically keep an eye out for visual events like flaring or plumes of smoke that come from a facility. And the Breathe Cam, developed by the Breathe Project and the Create Lab together, actually develops a 24/7 archive of video material filmed from one or more camera angles of any particular site. There's none up right now around the Shell cracker, but that could become an option. And so you may ask, why might citizens want to deploy more monitors than Fenceline monitors hosted by Shell? And I think that's a really good question. Shell has only 4 continuous perimeter monitors, so there are physical gaps through which a plume could potentially travel undetected for a little while. I'd personally like to see dozens of monitors placed all around the Shell plant at homes and businesses where people actually live and work. And that would also give us a better idea for how wind and inversion conditions might be impacting the flow of a chemical plume. More monitors ultimately give us faster access to better information that we, the citizens, control. And more monitors also help us ask better questions so that we can work together as a community to keep our community safe and healthy. I'm working with a range of other groups and individuals to place actually dozens of low-cost air monitors in the area around the Shell petrochemical plant. And if you'd like to host a monitor at your home or your business, and you live within about a 5-mile radius, give or take a few miles, please reach out to me at mark@lens.blue. Thanks so much for your time and attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Our final presenter tonight is Eric Brewer, the Director of Beaver County Emergency Services. Thank you for being with us.
Welcome, and thanks for having me. My name is Eric Brewer. I'm the Director of Emergency Services for Beaver County. We're a branch of the county government under the county commissioners. Our department has 2 divisions, the Emergency Management Agency, or EMA, and 911. I've been with the county for over 20 years. I worked in both capacities. Under the 911 division, we have a deputy director who oversees that. There are approximately 50 employees, and they process 911 calls. Everything from taking the calls, giving pre-arrival instructions, and then dispatching the appropriate agency to that, police, fire, or EMS. There's a lot of training that's involved, and a lot of continuous training. So once they're certified as a telecommunicator, they have to continuously go through update training. The other part of that program is the 911 fee, or what they call Act 12, and that's across the Commonwealth. So if you have a phone, or cell phone, or a home phone, or a device in general that you pay a monthly service fee on, you also pay $1.65 out of that, which goes to the Commonwealth to fund the 911 system. As the county, we apply to the Commonwealth in a grant program to get some of that funding back into the county to run the 911 system, to pay the employees, to run the phone system and the radio system. And those are expensive systems to run. So not all your tax dollars goes to running the 911 system. It's actually the $1.65 fee that you pay per device that runs the 911 system, and that's Commonwealth-wide. Under the Emergency Management Agency Division, or the EMA, we have a deputy director that oversees that division, and there are 3 subtopics under there. The first one being municipal coordinators. Title 35 in the Commonwealth says that each municipality is required to have an emergency management coordinator, or EMC, and he's responsible for doing emergency planning for that municipality, and to have an EOP, or an emergency operations plan, for that municipality. Things like evacuation sites, etc. We oversee and we do the training for those emergency management coordinators. The next would be the Hazardous Materials Response Program. Each chemical company is required to report the chemical that they use, produce, or store. They also pay a small fee for that goes to the Commonwealth. And we apply to the Commonwealth in a grant program to get some of that money back here in Beaver County to fund the Hazardous Materials Response Program. Those chemical companies are also required to report chemicals that they use, produce, or store to the local fire departments, so that they're not running into that site blindly, right? So if XYZ chemical company has XYZ chemical, they let the local responders know that, so that they know what they have on site. It's a safety program. And the last being the Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program, or REP. We have a nuclear power plant in our county, which is in Shippingport. And we do a 10-mile EPZ, or emergency planning zone training around that site. We're required to do that by the federal government. So it's 10-mile radius around the nuclear power plant. We do training in radiological emergency preparedness training for those municipalities. And there are 27 municipalities in that EPZ within the 10-mile radius around the nuclear power plant. You may have seen this come to you or get mailed to you. This has a lot of, and it's backwards, I know, it has a lot of good planning in it, but better yet, it has some cards in the back that we'd like you to fill out. And these are our needs cards. And in there, it tells us if you're hearing impaired, mobility impaired. When you fill those out, we send them back to the municipality's emergency management coordinator so that they have an idea of who and what they need to do if there was a disaster. And you can get that online at beavercountypa.gov. Or you can call us at our office here at 775-1700. Once again, you can get more information at beavercountypa.gov and look up at emergency services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to begin the live part of our program. And I'd like to start by welcoming all of our panelists in for the discussion. We have lots of questions. So I'm going to begin with one for Karen Gdula and Barbara Goblick. What might you do differently, or have you done differently since going through your experience? Or what is your advice to other people who might be having a pipeline running near their house?
Unmute, I guess.
Yeah, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Karen Gdula, and I would recommend making sure that you have an exit path. Make sure you have a way of leaving in case there is an emergency. I will tell you that I do have my to-go bag packed in case I need to ever exit again. It'll be a lot quicker that I can get out of the house, get into my car, and get going. And I don't know, Barbara, is there anything to add?
Just be prepared. Like Karen said, we have bags packed.
Yeah.
My mom's a diabetic, and so she has insulin. I did grab that day, but in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, what do I have to grab? I have to grab that. I have to grab the cat's food. I have to get this. I have to get that. Just think about everything you will need when you leave your house.
I'll add to that we did shelter in place at our local fire hall, and there were people that did leave without their medications. Thankfully, the Red Cross came, and they did help those that needed medicines to get what they needed in the meantime, but make sure you take your medicines.
Yes.
You don't want to be without that. That's our recommendation.
Thank you. Somewhat related, this is a question for Eric Brewer. Does the Beaver system have an emergency, does Beaver County have an emergency response system in place that residents should sign up for, and how do they do that? And I know the answer to this, but the question's for you.
Sure. The vendor we use, it's a mass notification system, is Swift 911, and you can get that on the county's website. There's a link to it on beavercountypa.gov. Look under emergency services, and there's a link to get information that's put out either by phone, text, email, fax, pagers, if anybody uses those anymore.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question for Anna Hoffman. What community changes have you noticed since people have started interacting with your tools through the Create Lab?
So that's a great question. I think that people who live near industrial air pollution are really used to seeing and smelling the kind of things that come out of these plants, like big belches of black smoke, for instance, in the U.S. Steel Mon Valley area. But when you interact with air quality monitors, you are empowered to become a little more systematic about recording your experiences and using that as evidence to go toe-to-toe with industry or with local enforcement agencies. So I encourage people to interact with monitors in that way.
Thanks. There's another question for you in the box. You said that Shell has 3 monitors for measuring total airborne lead and 1 for measuring, what was the other thing?
There's an SO2 monitor on the active EPA website also.
Okay,
But we don't expect too much SO2 from the Shell cracker plant, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Karl Koerner. Is Shell currently collecting air data now?
Hi, yeah. So as far as I know, they currently aren't. There might be someone with more current knowledge than me, but in our settlement, they're supposed to be collecting data 30 days after the startup of the ethane cracking unit. So we will be getting that data, we being EIP and Clean Air Council, that will find a way to disseminate into the community. And then 180 days after the whole opening of the plant, that's when the full system kicks online. And that was basically just to Shell doesn't want to sort of catch that initial, I guess, opening, since it's intended as a leak detection system. If you get initial startup of different units, you're going to be getting spikes in emissions, and the community wants to see that data, which is why we asked for it, and we got some of it. But it's not good for the system because it's not indicative of what's normally going on at the plant, and we want to catch leaks and basically bad things that are happening that aren't part of the operation of the plant.
Thank you. We got a couple questions for Mark Dixon related to air monitors. What do I need to do at my house to host a monitor? And is there funding available for citizen monitors?
Hey there, sorry, I'm typing the questions and then we're going to answer the questions. So, what do we need? If you want to monitor at your house, generally the things we like to see are some kind of internet that you have there, though we may get a few that do not require internet, just cellular. So if you don't have internet, that's not a deal breaker, but it really helps save on costs and other things if you have a high-speed internet connection at your house. And then we need a plug outside, like just a standard AC plug, and it'll connect to that. It's nice if you have a GFI type of plug so that it's safer for everybody, but if you don't, I usually will bring them to when I do the installation. And then what was the other question? Was there funding available? I think.
Yeah,
so,
is there funding available?
Yeah, so I've gotten good indications that there is some funding available, and I'm trying to collect that funding to make monitors available for free for people who live close to the plant. I mentioned in the 5-mile range. My sort of super focus area is in the 2 to 4 mile range, trying to put as many in there as possible, and then sort of expanding more in a looser net out to about 10 miles. And so if you're anywhere within that range, or you're interested in talking with me to see if you might be a good fit, sometimes you might be further out or in a weird spot that might be uniquely interesting to me. I'm interested in talking with anybody who might be interested in having a monitor at their house. And we'll probably be co-locating a VOC monitor and a purple air particle monitor once we get that, that system up and running. The main thing though that we really need is contacts with people. I have a handful of people who I already know are interested, and I'll be connecting with them once I get these monitors. But if you know someone in that zone, 2 to 4 miles out of the shell cracker zone or up to 10 miles, please reach out to me, mark@lens.blue, and I'll be happy to keep a list of all those people, treat them very nicely, and try to work to get them a monitor at their house or business.
Thank you. Another question for Eric Brewer, and this is from Karen Gdula. How is a decision made to notify communities to evacuate or to shelter in place?
That's always a good question, and that's the biggest challenge we face. So let me go back to the chlorine incident. I just happened to be in Mexico at that time on vacation. So the local responders, I should say the local municipality has an emergency management coordinator who makes a lot of those decisions. However, there's a lot of input into it. Whether that day was the DEP, the local fire chief. We use, it's funny, today we just had a whole day class on railroad incidents. And so we have some apps out there. One's called Wiser, and it's a chemical app. The ERG, or Emergency Response Guide. If we know the chemical, we can look in there, and it gives us suggested evacuation zones or to shelter in place. So reference, experts, and then it's a local decision. And then for the pipeline, I was at the pipeline incident. I got the call at 5 a.m. And that was a totally kind of a different one, because it's not that it's not a chemical, but that was a challenge for everyone. We've never faced that. And what Barbara and Karen both said was, we didn't know there was stuff in that line, whatever that stuff was. And going back to the Rochester incident, we didn't know there was stuff in the building, even though people were to report that. They didn't. So it's only as good as the information that we get.
Thank you. There's a related question. It's kind of a two-part question. What does the Beaver emergency management team do really well? And what are some things that we should not expect the team to be able to deal with?
So one thing I think we do well, and that's planning, only because we have a nuclear power plant in our county. And they are required to do all kind of planning, things that you wouldn't expect. And that's probably why the nuclear industry is the way it is. But so as far as planning, they do over planning, I would say. And we work well with our municipalities. So working with the municipalities is big, because they have the ultimate decision on what to do. If it's let's say a nuclear power plant incident, the governor's going to step in. Other than and it's going to be the municipality too. So, what was the other part of the question? Sorry.
What are some things that we should not expect emergency management to be able to deal with? Like, what are things that we should prepare ourselves for?
Well, somebody else brought about preparing yourself. The federal government, ever since Katrina, has been telling you, don't expect the government to step in until 72 hours, and that's the truth. If we have a major storm coming through, from the county standpoint, I say we have 50 employees. Those are on the 911 side. They're not on the emergency management side. Emergency management, we have 5 people. 2 of those are planners that are paid 100% from the nuclear power plant to do planning for radiological emergencies. So my staff, I have 5 out of a 160, 170,000 population. So we're not going to be there, and that's the message we need to get out, is you need to be prepared. If you live around a chemical plant, you need to be aware. And a lot of the chemical plants, they're required to report, and they report, I said, to the county, and they report to the local fire department of what they have, and they're required to do planning for certain chemicals, evacuations for certain chemicals. So, and I believe those are right to know for that. So if you have any questions about, number one, they should be good neighbors. If you go to them and ask, they should tell you. But if not, there's other ways you can get that. And it's all about community right to know. There's a EPCRA, EPCRA, it's the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, which is out there, which falls under chemical planning.
Thank you, appreciate that. Next question is, I'm not sure if this is better for Adam or Karl to answer. I'll let the two of you decide who wants to take it. When and how will the public be trained to access the data from the Fenceline monitors?
Yeah, I think we both could give it a try, but basically that's going to be a work in progress, because once the website's out there, I think we're going to be doing our best just to make sure everyone's up on how to access the data on it. We really hammered out some language in the settlement agreement to make sure that it didn't really have the same pitfalls as other settlements we've seen, where like sometimes companies have tried to hide the website in a place where like the public can't readily access it. So we wrote that in specifically that it's got to be, you know, prominent right on Shell's page. It's got to be in a place where it's, you know, you don't have to click like 20 links to get to it. But also as far as the data goes, we wanted to make sure it's in a very clear tabular format, so you can read each sort of parameter. And you know, as with any sort of monitoring data that's out there, we're going to do our best to make sure the public knows how to use that data, that it's a good resource.
Thank you. The next question is for Anna. You've got people in the Create Lab who work on the Mars projects and other advanced technology. Why work on local community issues?
I think a big theme among all of us that work at the Create Lab is a goal of changing narratives of tech development. So often tech can be used for predatory data collection means, and all of us see potential in tech to also invert power structures and make sure that people have the ability to own their own data and understand how to use technology to tell their stories in a way that can change their circumstances.
Thank you. The next question is for Karen, Gdula, and Barbara Goblick. You showed us some incredible photos from the incident that happened near your house. And I agree, it looked like it was the middle of the day and it was 5 o'clock in the morning. Did you find that the photos helped with enforcement, press, sharing your experience? And do you recommend that people take photos and videos of events that are happening? What's your recommendation?
So I do recommend taking photos and videos. We open communications with Energy Transfer, and we do have contact that we reach out to whenever we have questions. There have been a few times where I brought something to their attention and they asked for proof, and if I had a photo, I would send it to them, and that then allowed us to have some very quick resolution. So yes, I would highly recommend taking photos, especially if there is something that is of question, and then that helps for a faster resolution. Absolutely.
Thank you. And a question for either Adam or Karl. Will the Shell Fenceline monitor data be archived and retrievable over time and not just available for the moment and most recent readings, so that people would be able to look at temporal trends?
Data will be there. Just, yeah, as it's posted, it will remain there. Karl, I don't know if I'm missing any details on that. But
yeah, I'm looking at that exact part of the agreement now. So if you're following along, it's section D, the monitoring data website on page 23 of the agreement. I posted the link to the agreement in the chat. But yeah, basically that we envision the website to have past data so you can look at trends. If Shell doesn't end up doing that, we'll have the data as well. We'll have it be available to whatever we track the website as it's posting things. The frequency of posting depends on, it's once every 2 weeks, I believe, for the PAM system. And then they post 15-minute block averages of the PIDs, photo ionization detectors, which are total VOC sensors. Those are the 3 continuous monitors CAM system. And that'll drop down to 5-minute block averages when there's actually an incident above the action level. Then they'll post the Summa canister data along with that, as well as the investigation reports and things like that. So all that's going to be available in perpetuity as long as the website's up. So that's the goal.
Thank you. Another question for Eric, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not sure. Does emergency management have to wait for industry to share information on a situation, or if your department witnesses something like an explosion or a fire, can you warn people, or do you have to wait for industry to tell you what happened?
No, we don't wait for them to tell us what happened. We don't, now from the, let's just say from a regulatory authority, the county does not have any. So, you know, if you're talking about a chemical company, we don't, it's complicated. We can go in depending on what they're reporting to us, things like that. Pipelines, we don't have any control over. I will say though, however, since the Center Township incident, we've tabletopped, we've done emergency plannings with all of the pipeline that are coming through Beaver County. I mean, that's in hindsight now, but they are required to do local emergency planning. I'm not sure when that went in, but you know, we've done it with Marathon, Shell, the Shell pipeline. So they've been reaching out to us actually.
Thanks. There's another question for you here, just a second. I'm scrolling through, we're getting questions from the Facebook feed too. So emergency management, let's see. Emergency management is a mystery for many community members. What do you love about your work?
I've done it for 20 years. I just, even though we don't sleep, I'm on call 24/7. I don't know, it's just what we do. And it's not just me, it's everybody in the profession, I think. We're different.
Thanks. I've got 2 more questions for you so far. Let's see. Has your department had to hire to prepare for the build out and growth of the gas industry in the region? And is the county ready if the Shell plant explodes?
Well, let me answer the first part. We actually did hire somebody to work with the Marcellus drilling, as well as the pipelines. So in the Marcellus, they're required to report things also, emergency addressing and when they're doing things, when they're not doing things, as well as the pipelines. So we did hire somebody back full-time back in late last year, just for the oil and natural gas industry, basically. Are we ready for an explosion? It's all part of the planning process. If things go bad, and it doesn't matter if it's the Shell plant, a pipeline fire, that could happen in any chemical plant. So I'm not just singling out Shell. It's not just single out Shell, but that could happen at any chemical plant. And it's once again, it's going back to the local responders. You know, from the county standpoint, we have a hazmat team, hazardous materials team that assists local responders. But those local responders are who have the fire engines, and we get there afterwards to assist in the bad stuff.
Thanks. And then there's a related question that came in, and it says, how large is Beaver's fire department? And I'm not sure if that's referring to Beaver, the borough, or Beaver, the county. And so
Beaver County doesn't have a fire. There are 42 fire departments in the county. Each one of them are all different sizes. They are municipality run. The county does not have a countywide fire department.
Thanks.
And they're all different sizes.
Yeah, Yeah. What types of chemical reactions at the Shell facility are you most concerned about?
I mean, they would probably flammability. I'm not sure what they're all what all's gonna be on site. You know, I've been down to the Morgantown area because they're planning on one down there also. So I've talked to Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, their plants. Those ones over the phone, I said I traveled to Morgantown because they're asking us what we're doing. We've asked the plants down south what they did. That was probably 2014, 2015 before it was even announced. So we're just learning from the others. But flammability is the biggest one without knowing what chemicals they can't carry on site.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Barbara and Karen. What do your neighbors think about what happened? Are they moving? Are they concerned?
So, of course, it shook up the entire neighborhood after the explosion, and everybody had different thoughts about moving. No one at this time has moved specifically because of the explosion, other than the house was destroyed closest to the explosion site, and those people have moved. Energy Transfer bought them out. They also bought out another home, and those people have moved because of the proximity. The rest of the neighborhood, my husband and I actually considered it, but then we took a closer look at some of the other pipelines that were being built in Beaver County, and we came to find out that they were being built in people's front yards and their side yards, and are 30 feet from their homes. And although we have pipelines on Ivy Lane, the closest one to me, I estimate, is about 200 to 250 feet. And it's nowhere near the 30 feet that I've seen in a neighborhood very close to where my house is. So at this time, we're staying put.
We are too. It's better that you know what's there, because if you move, nothing's to say that another pipeline wouldn't come in and, like Karen said, go through your front yard.
Right.
Here we know the pipeline is about 150 feet from my house, but we know where it's at.
And
we know what's there.
And it's a lot farther than where we're seeing other pipelines being built. So we're staying.
Thanks. A related question. Is there any extra information about pipelines, resources, and/or neighborhood groups that you think would be helpful for people to know about, so that they know what's going on in their area or their area's risk factors?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I really think the topography of Pennsylvania leads people to not realize where the pipelines are and where this oil and gas build out is. We have hills, we have valleys, we have lots of trees, and it's hiding a lot of it. I've actually talked to people and educated them about how close some of the pipelines are to their homes, and they're amazed. They had no idea. So I think there's just a lack of awareness, and I think a part of it is because of our topography.
And I don't think there's really one specific website or one specific group that can give you all the information about the pipelines. You just have to start looking and look at the different pipeline maps, look up pipelines, look up your area, see where all the pipelines go. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, Barbara and I have spent a lot of time educating ourselves. I mean, we've reached out, we don't have problems. We've reached out to our county commissioners, our township supervisors. We have contacts with pipeline people. We've talked to our local representatives. We're doing whatever we can to keep ourselves safe. And I think maybe start with your township supervisors. Go to some of the meetings, ask some questions, and from there you'll find a path of places to go.
Thank you. The next question, and you had referred to this, the next question is from Julie. It's to Eric or anyone else who could answer. And Barbara, you'd mentioned them. Are there any detailed maps available showing the gas pipelines going through all the municipalities in Beaver County, specifically the locations of the energy transfer pipelines in detail? So I'm not sure if who of our presenters would like to take that one.
Well, I know Frac Tracker has all of it detailed. They are definitely listing everything from the pipeline standpoint in their maps, which are absolutely wonderful. It's a great resource.
Yep, and Erica Jackson put the link for it in the chat for the national pipeline map.
There it is. Okay.
Thanks, Erica.
And there's a question for Eric. Let's see. This is from Marcia. Why did no one in an emergency capacity in Beaver County know that the energy transfer pipeline, the Revolution pipeline, was operational? Whose responsibility was it to inform you, and have reporting mechanism changed since the Ivy Lane Revolution pipeline explosion?
So it's not unusual for the county emergency management not to know. A lot of times they notify the local authorities. So the borough, township, municipality, city that you're in knows that. That day, nobody knew. Nobody knew that product was flowing through there. It's ultimately responsible of the pipeline owner to notify. They didn't. I would like to think now that there are better working relationships with that. As far as regulations, I'm not aware of anything that says that they have to tell us, but it may go back to the local municipality, but not the county.
Thank you. And then there's another question for you. Will there be an evacuation plan similar to the nuclear plant if the chemical plants explode each other, is the question. And I live within 10 miles of the nuclear power plant. And so last week, Thursday, we had the annual drill with the sirens and everything. And so I'm wondering if this is my question, if there are going to be similar drills to respond to a chemical plant disaster. I guess that's my question added on to Bob's question.
So legally, that is the nuclear power plant by the federal government, the NRC, FEMA is required to do a 10-mile planning zone in Beaver County. Chemical plants are not. However, they are required to report their chemicals that they have on site, use, produce, or store to the county, LEPC, Local Emergency Planning Commission, as well as the local fire department. Depending on the chemical, they're also required to have they call it's an emergency plan for each chemical. So depending on what that chemical is, some are worse than others, they would have evacuation information. It's ultimately responsible to the responsibility of the local municipality to do emergency planning.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm not sure who to direct it to, maybe Ben Kuntzman. Do other plants in Beaver Valley, i.e. BASF or NOVA, exceed benzene levels? There's a concern about Shell being so large and profitable that they can handle lawsuits if caught exceeding. So I'm not sure if you're able to answer that or not, Ben, or if there's somebody else on the call who can do that.
Yeah, I can take that. So in terms of benzene, what we tried to do with our settlement was to isolate the effects from the Shell plant itself. So taking out benzene from upwind monitors and basically calculating the difference between upwind and downwind. And so this really isolates the contribution from the Shell facility. In terms of benzene from the other facilities, BASF, I'm not aware, Karl might be able to answer this better than me, but I'm not aware of any benzene monitors at those facilities currently. I think the idea is that we're hoping the settlement will push other similar chemical facilities to have to install these types of fence-line monitors down the road. Karl, if you have anything to add to that, please feel free.
Yeah, since our basis was layer, I guess our hope is that future facilities would, even though this is a settlement agreement, would consider this layer or would be viable for layer in the future, just by setting this precedent. I think that was our ultimate goal, is to say, hey, they're doing it here. You know, they can be doing it elsewhere, and they should.
Thank you. The next question, I'm not sure if Marcia or Eric would be able to answer this. With the Rochester fire, do we know the concentration of chlorine or bromine that was released?
That would definitely be a Eric answer.
That would be a DEP answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So DEP does the air monitoring in the count. Well, does the air monitoring. We don't have the right kind of equipment to do total air monitoring. We can go in and do, you know, proximity air monitoring around the incident, but as far as, you know, miles away, we don't have that equipment. That's all DEP.
Thank you. There's a question from Terry, and I'm not sure who would be best to answer this one. Maybe one of the folks from Environmental Integrity Project, I'm not sure. What's the best way for citizens to approach their municipal supervisors to ask for increased pipeline setbacks from homes, places of public gathering, parks, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. A member of EIP who's not on the call is our Pennsylvania organizer, Lisa Graves Marcusi, and she's done a lot of work with citizens in the area, and has generated basically this citizens handbook to help people try to know the avenues to go in terms of like how to have the most effect approaching your supervisors, or whatever your municipal government happens to be, and like the different ways you can try to find information using right to know law requests, using like the public meeting requirements, and also just some certain kind of templates for best practices to seek out. Like, there's certain ordinances that municipalities have. And actually, one thing that EIP recently did was we did a sort of survey of, it's obviously not every municipality in PA, but we looked at 31 specific ones, both in southwestern Pennsylvania, and then also at the other end of, basically where a lot of the pipelines are terminating outside of Philadelphia, to try to come up with just a basic survey of what different municipalities have done and are doing to try to address pipeline infrastructure and also oil and gas infrastructure. So that's all available on our website. I can post a link in the chat, and also post a link to the PA Citizens Handbook as well.
Also, to add to that, I have a shameless plug for EIP is also having a webinar series about roadmap to oil and gas protections that Lisa Graves Marcusi is putting on as well. So I can also send a link to the graphics for that. We're having a keynote speaker on October 8th, I know. So I can send some details on that.
Thank you. And our next question is from one presenter to another. Mark Dixon would like to ask Eric Brewer if there are any monitors that we're not considering that citizens could deploy that would help out your team.
So,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was thinking, whatever we can access is great. We don't know that there's a lot out there, though. I'm learning as I'm reading some of the comments where the monitors are. I saw in there that the mall Beaver Valley Mall has one. We don't know that. So wherever they're put, they're not reported to the locals, and it's all about communications. We don't know.
Thank you.
If we know where one is, though, we'll access.
Great. Good to know.
Eric, a lot of the monitors we talked about tonight do have open data. And so if we start deploying them, you will have access. You'll just be able to click on a page and see whatever readings we can see. So that's our intention. We have no idea if you'll find them useful, but we might have been able to see a chlorine plume on there. I'm not sure, or some other things. So that's just all I know. But I didn't know about that VOC monitor either.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's excellent info.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question for Marcia. Did you have any health impacts from the chlorine fire?
None that we're aware of. I know DEP, like I said, I was on vacation that week, but DEP had no measurable readings, from what I understand, either during that incident.
Thank you.
I can add to that. As far as I know, there were numerous people that went to the emergency room, we heard, but I don't know the particulars of that. We had heard stories too that there was a man on a ladder near the site on Friday night. He got really sick and passed out. And then in the Beaver County Times, there was an interesting article about a gentleman in a convertible on Friday late, and he drove through the cloud and literally became like, shook. He was shaking, almost like, he just had incredible immediate events. I don't know, the Times article wasn't real specific, but he ended up in the emergency room at Sewickley Hospital, and they literally took him immediately into Pittsburgh. The effects overwhelmed him. It was very bad. So, it's kind of anecdotal in a way, but I thought it was interesting that the Beaver County Times did have that excellent story about the gentleman who drove through the cloud in his convertible on Route 65.
Thank you. And I'm monitoring the chat box, which is going crazy with comments. So make sure you're looking through there. Let me see. A question for all of the presenters, and this is actually going to be the last question for the evening because we're coming up on 8:30. What are the questions that we need to be asking for future events, and or who are presenters that you would like to see us invite?
We're just all going to have to hold our nose, touch our nose as not it. But hopefully everybody has a reflection. I'm just jumping in to break the silence, but I'm wondering if Karl, Eric, Karen, Marcia, everybody on here on the list. Who are we not asking?
Chad, can you repeat the question real quick?
Sure. What are the questions that we need to be asking for future events? Because this is one part of a series. And who are some presenters that you think it would be helpful for us to invite?
I have a recommendation of folks that I feel like would be a really great model and speak to some of the questions I've seen coming through the chat. Representatives from the community group ACAN, Allegheny Clean Air Now. Allegheny County Clean Air Now. Did I say that whole word? Okay. Yeah. Angelo is one of the members of that community group that I've sat with him in Allegheny County Health Department meetings and watched him know the permits of the industries that are around his community better than the health department knows them. And it's so incredibly powerful to see citizens create enforcement actions. And I think that he can teach us all a lot about that.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I think it might be interesting to hear from other communities, like a lot of the Gulf and Texas communities that have dealt with similar petrochemical facilities, just to see what their experiences have been and what they've done in terms of both organizing and setting up their own monitoring networks and figuring out how to ensure that the facilities are the best neighbors they can be. So, for example, there's Air Alliance Houston, Louisiana Bucket Brigade, a lot of other groups out there. And, when we were working on the Shell settlement, a lot of the Fenceline monitoring systems we considered as sort of models or, examples of ones that Shell should be looking into were in those communities. So they've dealt with this for a while now.
Yeah, the Bucket Brigade's a great example of citizen science, and I definitely encourage people to look into that. Also would be interested to hear from Albert Presto in terms of his ramp sensors and plans for that, especially in the Pittsburgh area, but getting some in Beaver County would be interesting. I don't really know the status of that. People at CMU might know more, but yeah, I think Albert Presto is a great resource and has been in the past. Clean Air Council personally is going to be deploying some VOC sensors in the area too, that I'm developing myself. So I'm just working out the kinks and making sure they actually spit out good readings. So, but they'll be available hopefully soon. The pandemic has kind of slowed everything down, but that's my plan, is to get some of those out near natural gas infrastructure. Might be cool to have people who have used FLIR cameras in the past. That's another sort of leak detection thing. Citizen science, I know one of the groups, I don't remember who has them. And honestly, a lot of this also comes down to personal observation. I know EHP has done a lot of great work around that. So like observing symptoms, tracking emergency room visits. Basically, if a disaster does happen, you want to have people on top of it in the community reporting this stuff, and just having a bunch of active community members is what we're striving for, us and EIP moving forward. So we want to have people out to different workshops about how to use the Fenceline monitoring system, what's going on in your community, and just talking to people and keeping the network going.
Thank you.
My reflection is that I think a lot of people see these little monitors going up here and there, and you can look in the EPA map and Purple Air map, and you see these little monitors going up. But I think that we're on the cusp of a different state of human observation where we will actually have pervasive ambient monitoring. We will have tens and hundreds of thousands of tiny monitors looking at our air, our humidity, radiation, or just everything. And that's where industry and the data systems, I think, are headed, is this massive convergence of information. So think about data in that frame, I think, is the question that I like to get my head around. It's not just these putting up 2 or 3 or 20 monitors even. It's like, how will we as a community work with our emergency responders? How will we work with the businesses? How will we relate to government when we all know in a very detailed way every bit of pollution that crosses our path, and probably be able to trace it, at least roughly, from source to destination? That's where we're headed, and that's the world I think that we need to start to think about, how we work together, how we relate to each other, how do we set up data systems to manage that, where do we put all these monitors, how do we afford them, who pays for them, all these sorts of things. But that's where we're headed. Totally pervasive systemic monitoring will change these relationships in a dramatic way.
Thank you. Are there any other suggestions? There's
another idea, if that's okay.
Yeah.
ATSDR might be a good resource to talk to. We've worked with someone from ATSDR in the past. They tend to do smaller focus studies based off of like cancer clusters and things like that. So they might be good for just getting an idea of how that epidemiological mapping and like chemical mapping works, and how to get a study going in your area.
Thank you. And it looks like there are a couple suggestions in the chat box too. including an expert that can discuss endocrine disruptors and their impacts on vulnerable population. Discussion about which VOCs are endocrine disruptors of concern with petrochemicals. Public health nurses or doctors. Heritage Valley Medical System. That would be, yeah. So good suggestions. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our presenters for being here tonight. Thank you so much for your work beforehand to make your videos and for just being here tonight to answer questions. You were amazing. Please join us in 2 weeks on Wednesday, September 30th at 7 p.m. for water monitoring and drinking water safety. And for the student screening of the story on plastic, followed by a live Q&A and discussion with the film's co-creator, Steve Wilson, on Wednesday, October 14th at 6 p.m. And thank you to all who were posting things in the chat box. This was very informative, both to be listening to the presentations as well as to be reading the chat box. And so if you'd be willing to stay on the call just for a couple more seconds, we're going to list our sponsors. Please go to Facebook, like them, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful evening.